Hello Blender folks and art animators, welcome back to my channel and to this tutorial series Rigs of the Trade. I'm epistemic-gnomes and this time we'll address Spline IK bone constraint that can be applied to facial rigging. So what is spline bone constraint and how does it work? Well, it is spline because it is one of those bone constraints which use a curve object, and a curve object, just like this one I have here for my rig, is made usually out of splines. And the spline, here I am on edit mode for the curve object. A spline is a set of two control points that I'm selecting here and here. Forget about the handlers here, it doesn't matter, it's just the control points. And the segment, which is not highlighted here, but a segment is what is being here, this curved line here, and the spline is this whole set. So I have many splines here, and this is a cyclic curve, by the way. Okay, so this is for the spline, and IK, as you might already know, stands for inverse kinematics. So it's one of those bone constraints which is placed usually very far ahead on a F-key chain. So just like in this case, just let me change this display type from B-bone to octahedral so you can see better, and also go on edit mode. So you can see those bones, they apparently are connected, but that will be a crazy loop, an impossible loop in this kind of parenting, I guess. So this is the last bone of this F-key chain. These are all parented, connected one to each other until this one, which is the main parent of this F-key chain, forward kinematics chain, and it is ultimately connected to the head bone, which is this big one, which doesn't interest us right now. So if we go on pose mode, we can see that the spline IK bone constraint is placed precisely on that last bone, not anywhere else, because what I want to do, I have 6 bones here. I want that the spline IK bone constraint affect the whole chain as an IK chain, so chain length 6. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All the 6, including itself, the owner of the bone constraint, is being influenced by this spline IK bone constraint. So this is why spline IK, you see, bone constraint. Next, in order to better visualize the relations which occur in this spline IK rig, I had to hide many things like the hair and even the eyelashes from the character. So don't worry if this character is looking just a bit weird right now, it's just for learning purpose. Besides the curve object with its splines and this layer of deforming bones with the spline IK bone constraint and the IK chain, and of course the wave painting of those deforming bones relative to the mesh. Here are the wave painting. It's not very good wave painting. It's just good enough that it shows smoothness on the deformations through this rig. And so besides that, there is another layer of bones, which is that of the controller bones, which are here, the blue ones here. They are like oriented like that, okay? And those bones, they are the ones that I move currently. I don't need that, and actually I can make this kind of deformation. You see that these controller bones are deforming not directly the mesh, but the splines. The curve object is being deformed due to those controller bones. But actually those controller bones are more, in this case at least, are more likely controller bones for the curve than for the other deforming bones themselves. But because of the spline IK bone constraint affecting the IK chain bones, they will kind of follow the curve precisely. They'll try to follow the curve, even better if they have segments, because then they can get more curvy. And the deformation is just not being better because I didn't set up this beyond experimental. With more splines, with better wave painting, those deformations get way better. So you see here, for example, the curve is deforming, the splines here are deforming way better than the bones there, even though they have a lot of segments. This I can improve in many ways. Another thing that is important theoretically is that if I go on edit mode for the curve object and I pick one of those control points and move it around, you see that I'm already able to make changes, transformations to the deforming bones, which are following the splines because of the spline IK bone constraint. And this has nothing to do with the controller bones in this rig. The controller bones are meant so that I can change the control points outside of edit mode for the curve object, like that I am here right now. So any transformations I'm making here, these are root transformations, and that's not probably not a good way to animate this thing. That's why instead we should use controller bones for keyframing, right? I would change the splines here if I were to make additions on the curve object or making the rig for the first time. Yes, that was rain outside, pretty nice. So more theoretical thing that is fundamental to understanding this rig better is that the control points, in order for them to be dragged around by the controller bones, they need hook modifiers. At least that's how I've learned this thing. Instead of controller bones, you could use empty objects or other things, but I'm using here controller bones because I have already an armature object. I think it's simpler to use that, make that way. So when for example, I have 7 hook modifiers because I also have 7 control points. It's 1 for 1. So for example, this, if I go to this hook modifier, I click on this select button. Yes, this is the hook modifier created for precisely this control point to be assigned to target that bone, which is this one. But don't worry about the names, because the names I've used here are a bit confusing. I didn't know that until I've made many times this kind of rig. So in the making process we'll be doing here, I'll use like 001, 002, like a numerical sequence. It's way better, less confusing. The thing we must take into account is not confusing parenting dashed lines like this one for the controller bone with the guidelines of the hook modifiers, which are, hold on, these ones. You see these black square dots here, those are the hook modifiers that I have, and because of the dashed lines design, they can be confused. So for example, look at this. Wow, this is crazy, right? Dash lines everywhere, but you see that the controller bones here, they are going to somewhere else than this origin. And this because they are parented, the controller bones, they are parented to the head bone, which tail is here. While the hook modifiers dash lines are being redirected to the origin of the armature object, most likely, because it's the armature object which contains the controller bones, right? And lastly, for this introduction, in the case of Spline IK rig, where I kind of need to have a left and right side, it's not like a spine rig that is central. Now here I have the requirement to have this mirrored, right? But because of a current limitation on the curve object relative to the mirror modifier, like if I just try to, you see here I have a mirror modifier, if I just try to apply it, it doesn't work because the curve must be converted to a mesh. I found that this process is destructive, and I couldn't find a good workaround on this. So I found other ways to make this symmetrization. But this also can pose certain troubles, because certain aspects of the curve are perfectly symmetrized, but not, for example, the modifiers. On another hand, the bones that I've created with all their bone constraints and other features, they are perfectly symmetrized, except in this rig I found out for some reason the target of the spline IK bone constraint, when the case of a curve, is not symmetrized, so I have to change it here for the new curve. Which makes for the fact that symmetrizing bones and bone constraints is pretty simple in the rig. The problem is when it comes to symmetrizing the curve. So let's get started. First, make sure you don't have any keyframes relative to any objects on your scene, nor bones, because this time we're gonna work with curve objects, so we have additional objects to care for, and if we mess up with accidental keyframing stuff, we can really have trouble with the hook modifiers that relies on, I guess, word space to be assigned properly, and so this can really get confused. So make sure you don't have keyframes on this process. Also, a practice that I do in Blender usually is that I have all my objects on the scene locked, and of course they all have the same origin, including the curve objects. They should have the same origin of the mesh object, the armature object. I do that because I don't want to accidentally move things and have to reset and etc. First we go on edit mode for the armature object. I don't need this layer here, I just need to go on the front view, orthographic view. So let's get the cursor to the word origin, one shortcut. Then let me add a new bone here, and now I'm gonna start just as I've made previously. I'm gonna start somewhere like in here, and the bone chain will, this FK chain will make a circle like that and end about here. So let me first use the snap tool, snap to face, so that I can just easily match those locations without, I'll even use a split area here so that I can check if this is working correctly, and yeah, more or less correctly. This doesn't need to be perfect, it's just actually I'm gonna make it a little further, because this is not the exact contour of the eye, this is actually the surrounding area region of the eye. So this requires some this requires some distance, so that it will be more organized, because then the wave painting, even though, yes, I could use auto wave even, that could be better. So maybe I'm making more bones than necessary. Anyways, I'm gonna use the B-bones segments, bendy bones feature, right, for improving, like simulating like I'd have more bones than I actually do. So this technique is, I found, is always good for these spline IK rigs. Here I'm just trying to make it a little more precise, but I think that should be good enough. Maybe this, for this character style, just a bit more. Here is question, arguably, if I shouldn't have more bones, so because of this kind of curve, which is very special here. Let's put it like that. So now that I have this, I think I can just auto weight.